It was a beautiful evening, the sun just starting to set behind the mountains, casting a warm orange glow over our peaceful neighborhood. I was in the kitchen making dinner while the soothing hum of the radio played in the background. My son, David, had just returned home from college for the weekend. There was a peaceful, soothing atmosphere in the house, the type of tranquility that comes with familiarity. David had grown up so fast. It seems like only yesterday he was a small boy following me around the house, asking countless questions about life. Now at 22, he was no longer the small boy I remembered, but a young man. Strong, confident, and sometimes unknowingly aloof. The dynamic between us had evolved as he matured, and it was something that I was still getting used to. Dinner was ready, and I called him from the sitting room. When we sat down at the dining table, I noticed the way he stared at me. Different, intense in a way that made me wonder. I brushed it off at first, believing it was my imagination. We talked about his education, his fellow students, and how much he missed home, but the way he spoke, how his eyes focused on mine longer than normal, made me feel something I was unable to put into words. After the meal, we decided to watch a movie together, something we used to enjoy all the time before he went back to college. The sitting room felt more relaxing than normal, the dim lighting and comfortable cushions making it an inviting atmosphere for a peaceful night in. I couldn't recall the last time we had such a wonderful time together. As the movie played, I found myself gazing at him more than I should have, seeing how he had grown into himself. He was no longer the little boy I had nurtured, but a man. And then, just as I began to experience a weird sense of anxiety about thoughts crossing my mind, he moved closer to me on the couch. Initially, I assumed it was innocent, but then his hand brushed across mine. A burning sensation shot through me. Something electrifying, something I knew I should not feel. I pulled my hand away immediately, shocked by the intensity of the experience. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked, his voice calm, almost worried. I looked at him. My heart raced, not sure about what to say. "Nothing, sweetie. I am just exhausted, that's all," I responded, trying to dismiss the feeling and hoping he had not noticed that tension between us. But I felt something had changed at that exact moment. Something we could not ignore. The boundary between mother and son had blurred, and although neither of us had crossed it, the atmosphere was packed with unspoken emotions. We stayed there quietly and reserved. The movie was playing in the background, but none of us was watching it anymore. I got up, telling him I wanted to retire to bed early, but as I walked away, I couldn't escape the feeling that something had happened between us. As I lay in bed that fateful night, my heart raced. I knew I could not allow that feeling to grow. At heart, I wasn't sure how to keep my distance for us. The following morning, I woke up feeling disturbed. The incidents of last night played repeatedly in my mind. To dismiss the feeling, I told myself it was all in my head. I was his mother, nothing more, nothing less. I adored him sincerely, but not in a manner that could ever be misunderstood. I was being unreasonable, I told myself. David was already awake by the time I came downstairs, seated at the kitchen table sipping coffee. He greeted me with a smile, as though nothing had happened. Perhaps it actually had been nothing, just a weird moment that only I had noticed. I chose to dismiss it from my thoughts, at least for now. "Morning," I said, faking a smile and trying to sound as normal as I could. "Morning, Mom," he responded, his voice relaxed and comfortable. "I was thinking of going for a hike later. Would you like to join me?" A hike? It had been many years since we'd done something like that together. I hesitated for a while, not sure if I should spend more time alone with him after the way I was feeling last night. But then I told myself that it was just a mother and son enjoying time together. There was absolutely nothing wrong with that. "Yes," I said. "It sounds nice." Later that afternoon, we went to a nearby trail, a location we had gone to multiple times when he was younger. The air was crispy, the sky a brilliant blue, and for just a moment things seemed normal. We strolled side by side, discussing nothing in particular. Old memories, his aspirations for the future, normal small talk. I found myself laughing, feeling more comfortable with him, thinking perhaps I had overreacted the night before. But as we went along the trail, there were times where our conversations would pause, creating a prolonged silence that seemed heavier than it should. At certain points, as we reached a clearing with a lovely view of the valley below, David abruptly stopped and turned to me. "You have always been there for me, Mother," he said, his voice calm but sincere. "I don't know what I would have done without you." There was something concerning the way he said it that caught me off guard, a weakness in his voice that made my heart ache. I smiled, trying to lighten the situation. "Well, you don't have to be concerned about that anytime soon," I joked. "I'm not going anywhere." He did not laugh. Instead, he made a move closer, his eyes staring into mine. "No, I mean it," he continued. "You have always been more than just my mother. You've been everything." I froze. The words lingered in the air, serious and burdened with meaning I was not ready to deal with. I looked at his face for some hint that he was just being emotional, that this was just a harmless moment of affection. But there was something in his look, something that caused my heart to race again, just as the night before. "David," I said, my voice barely above whispering, "you know how much I adore you, right?" "Of course," he responded, moving even closer. "I adore you too. More than you think." My pulse accelerated. This was not how a mother and son were supposed to converse, stare at each other. My mind yelled at me to step back, to put a distance between us, but my body seemed locked in place. "I think we need to head back," I said, my voice wavering. "It's almost late." But before I could turn away, he reached out and softly grabbed my hand. The touch was harmless, but the way he held on, the way his thumb deliberately brushed over my skin, caused my stomach to twist in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom," he whispered gently, his voice full of something I couldn't quite define. "I don't know how to explain this, but I've been feeling something. Something I should not. And I believe you felt it too." Panic raced through me. I pulled my hand away, stepping back, my heart beating in my chest. "David, stop," I pleaded, my voice shaking. "You don't mean that. You're confused." He looked at me, his face a blend of confusion and sorrow. "I'm not confused, Mother. I know the way I feel." "No," I said, shaking my head. "This is not right. You're my son. We cannot." I couldn't even complete the sentence. The words felt dangerous, too expensive to say out loud. David took a deep breath, his expression filled with emotion. "I know. I understand that it's not right, but I can't help how I feel. And I don't think you can either." Tears flooded in my eyes as I struggled to preserve my calmness. "This is not happening. This shouldn't be happening. Stopping this before we crossed the uncrossable boundary was necessary." "I'm your mother," I said, my voice cracking. "And I love you, but not that way. I cannot. We cannot." The words lingered between us, heavy and suffocating. I could see the sorrow in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped in sadness. He nodded gently, looking down at the ground as if embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I swallowed hard, trying to fight the overpowering blend of emotions swirling inside me. "It's okay," I said softly, although I wasn't sure whether it really was. "Let's just go home." The way back home was suffocatingly silent. David didn't say a word, and neither did I. The magnitude of what had been said on the trail weighed heavily between us, causing every passing second to feel miserable. I kept my focus on the road ahead, my mind racing as I tried to understand what had just transpired. I couldn't believe every word that had come out of his mouth and the sentiments he had confessed. It seemed as though every detail I thought I knew about our relationship had been thrown upside down. When we eventually pulled into the driveway, David whispered something about going to his room. I didn't stop him as he walked up the stairs. I collapsed onto the seat, my body shaking with the emotions I had been holding back since that particular moment on the trail. I had no idea how to make sense of any of it. He was my son, my beloved boy, but he was not a boy any longer, and it was becoming terrifyingly evident that our relationship had developed into a complexity that none of us had imagined. I wanted to assume that his feelings were just a phase, anything transitory that would pass over time, but the way he was staring at me, the way his hand rested on mine, told me otherwise. Some part of me felt terrible, like perhaps I had done something wrong. Perhaps I had been too loving and too close for many years. But it wasn't right. Mothers were expected to love their children, to raise them, to be there for them. This is all I have ever done. But now everything seemed contaminated by the weird tension that had formed between us, and I didn't know how to deal with it. I spent the rest of the day attempting to avoid him, making myself busy with housework and anything that could distract me from the turmoil I felt. By the time evening arrived, I was emotionally worn out. I didn't want to talk about what had transpired, but I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. David and I could not continue like this, pretending everything was okay when it obviously wasn't. That particular night, after I had spent hours turning in bed, I heard someone knocking on my door. My heart sank. I knew it was him. "Mother? Can I get in?" David's voice sounded soft, almost hesitant. I hesitated, my mind yelling at me to say no, to put a boundary between us, but I knew I couldn't continue avoiding him. I had to face this, regardless of how uncomfortable it made me. "Come in," I responded, sitting on my bed with the covers shoved over me to avoid the mental storm that was coming. David walked inside, looking as confused and unsure as I felt. He stood at the edge of the room for a moment, not quite sure what to do with himself. After a few seconds, he sat down on the side of the bed but kept his distance. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I shouldn't have said what I said. I don't know what came over me." I nodded slightly, trying to find the suitable words. "I realize this is weird," I said, "but what happened earlier? It cannot happen again, David. We have to be careful. That wasn't how things were supposed to be." "I understand," he whispered, his eyes downcast. "But it's so difficult, Mom. I don't understand why I feel like this. I have tried to drive it away, but it keeps on coming back." His words struck something profoundly inside me. I felt an enormous sense of sorrow for him, for both of us honestly. This wasn't a scenario I had ever imagined myself being in, but here we were, trapped in a chain of emotions that none of us knew how to unravel. "I'm your mother," I said again, my voice soft but strong. "That's all I can ever be. You know that, right?" He looked at me, his eyes overflowing with sorrow, but he nodded. "I understand," he said. "I just don't want to lose you." "You're not going to lose me," I told him. "But we have to set limits, David. This is dangerous ground." For a short moment, there was silence between us. The uncertainty from earlier in the day still remained, but there was also a silent understanding that situations couldn't continue the way they were. We both knew it, even though none of us wanted to truly acknowledge it. "Perhaps it's better if you go back to school tomorrow," I suggested softly. "I think we both need some space for clearing our minds." David nodded lightly, although I noticed the sadness in his eyes. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "Maybe you're right." The next morning, I watched as he packed his belongings, the air between us thick with unsettled emotions. I wanted to hug him and tell him that everything would be fine, but I was unable to bring myself to do it, not after everything that had transpired. When he eventually left, the home felt emptier than it had in many years. I sat on the sofa, looking out the window, trying to understand everything. Although I knew we had made the right choice by separating, it didn't make it any easier. The relationship between a mother and son was supposed to be simple, natural, but ours turned into something much more complicated, something that none of us knew how to cope with. As time passed, I tried to resume my routine, but it wasn't the same. The house felt too empty without David, and I found myself thinking about him far more than I should have. I wanted to believe that distance would be helpful, that it would give us both the room we needed to sort out our feelings, but in my heart, I knew that things would never get back to the way they used to be. Something transpired between us, something we couldn't reverse, and I was not sure whatever the future held for us anymore. Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this.